Twitter at Christopher Pax, Paix, which is peace in French. And I'm so excited to bring to you today this interview with an amazing person. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very excited to talk Representative Franklin Garcia. I know we have two U.S. senators, quote-unquote shadow senators. They don't like to be called shadow, but there's a history why we have that label. But U.S. shadow representative, we have one shadow representative and two shadow senators. So I am the shadow representative. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and so thank you for that education. And so the first question that I'm actually going to ask you, where exactly are you from? Please tell us.
Yeah, so I was born in the Dominican Republic, which is a small island it's an island called Hispaniola, share with Haiti. And I arrived to Washington, D.C. in 1980. So the Dominican Republic is where I'm from.
Give us a little bit of information on your education, where you went to school, what you studied.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because I arrived in Washington, D.C. in 1980, and the school system in Washington, D.C. was not the greatest one. And my parents thought that they would educate their children, it was my sister and I, better if they moved out of the city. And so I ended up going to Montgomery County for the purpose of going to school. And I got educated there, ended up graduating from a high school in Silver Spring called Montgomery Blair High School. I then came back to D.C. and attended undergraduate at George Washington University and got an undergraduate degree there in business finance, and then went on to pursue a master's degree at the American University. When I got that master's degree was because I had a teacher that got me a job after I graduated from GW with finance, with a bachelor's degree in finance. The teacher helped me get a job at the World Bank, and I worked there for about 5 years, enough time to get them to pay for my graduate degree at AU in economics.
Wow, that's impressive. So how important would you say is Hispanic Heritage Month? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I've heard it say that we should not relegate one's culture or history to a month. And that's true in the African-American community. I've actually heard it more in the African-American community. In fact, I think it's a very famous phrase that Morgan Freeman, gets out on Facebook and everywhere. In the Hispanic community, that would be true. Though, what I say to that is that just like you celebrate Mother's Day, for example, and you don't say that it's the only time that you recognize your mom, right? You think your mother is one of the most precious things on earth, right? Every day. But this is the time when you pause and you say, Mom, I want you to know that I love you, that you're super special. And I know you're special for me every year. But I want us not to go routinely and have that taken for granted. And that's why Mother's Day is so important. So it's the same thing with Hispanic Heritage Month. We have a very diverse culture in this country. And there are a lot of different ethnicity and a lot of contribution from many different cultures. We celebrate beginning the 15th of September until the 15th of October, Hispanic Heritage Month. And during that month is the time when Hispanic culture can be shown, displayed to other communities. And the best of what we offer, we can put on display at that time because it is when it's most highlighted. Not to say that Hispanics don't contribute to this society all year round, but like I was saying with Mother's Day, we need to pause and recognize certain people at certain times. And that is what Hispanic Heritage Month means to us. It is the time when we say, we are here, we contribute to this economy, to the vibrancy of this culture, the fabric of this nation. And you can see it by seeing, the people that are in the arts, that are in medicine, that are in every facet of our society. And that's the time that we do that during Hispanic Heritage Month. Again, we do that simply because we want to ensure that all communities are highlighted adequately and their contribution recognized.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And yes, I would agree. In the African American history, Black history, we say the same exact thing and have been, that we can't just literally look at just 1 month, February for that matter, but we have to look at the whole year. So I love that. Love that. Same for Hispanic Heritage Month. How exactly did you get involved in politics in DC?
Yeah, and so I've always been, since I was 14, I've been active in activism. It is something that my uncle, who is now deceased, he died about 3 years ago, I think now, instilled in me by taking me with him to his political party meetings. When I was 14, I would go with him. He spoke Spanish only, and he would be affiliated with one of the political parties from the Dominican Republic that operated here in Washington, D.C., and he would take me with him to those meetings. And I became naturally interested in what they did and what they talked about. And so I transferred that knowledge to the at-large community in Washington, D.C., be it the Hispanic community, the immigrant community, or the at-large community of Washington, D.C., which includes everybody. And so, more specific, I think that my political life really grew when I and a few other visionaries, I want to say about 15 to 20 years ago, decided that Washington, D.C. needed to be empowered politically more. Because one thing that you notice in Washington, D.C. is that we have a lot of Latino-owned or Hispanic-owned nonprofits that have served the needs of our community for many, many decades. People would go to those nonprofits seeking services that traditionally or would otherwise be probably provided by somebody in a political office. But because we didn't have or don't still have that, they sought those services from nonprofits. And so meaning a group of visionaries here in DC, saw the need to change that, to bring that void, to bring a voice to our community. And that's when the creation of this organization called the DC Latino Caucus started. There, we were able to partner with the Democratic Party of Washington, D.C. to establish a relationship that allowed 2 of our members to be elected to that body. If you know a little bit about DC politics, you know that we have a central committee that we call the DC Democratic State Committee, which is really the arm of the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C. And what the Central Committee does is it has all these wards. The Washington, D.C. is divided into 8 wards. And so the Central Committee or the D.C. Democratic State Committee has all these wards organization, right? In addition to that, it has these other things called affiliate organizations. So in addition to having a representative in Ward 1 or in Ward 2, in Ward 3, it has all these affiliate organizations. Now, affiliates are kind of like a way to deal with the diverse issue that sometimes parties have. If you look at the Republican Party, for example, you notice that a lot of the ethnicity groups are missing in their party. And so what the Democratic Party has done is it has said, let us create groups so that we can also have representation, ethnic representation from those groups. So you could have, for example, the Hispanic caucus, the Asian American Pacific Islander caucus, the senior caucus, the veteran caucus. So all those different groups is what the DC Democratic State Committee or our central committee in the city calls affiliate organization. And so the DC Latino Caucus became an affiliate organization of the Democratic State Committee, our central committee for our Democratic Party. And so we are allowed to bring 2 seats, voting seats, from the DC Latino Caucus into the Democratic State Committee automatically, which is a big deal for us because for you to be a voting member of a central committee, and this is probably not true only in Washington, D.C., but throughout the entire nation, it's very challenging. You have to actually go out and seek, just like any other election that you have to run for. And if you don't have enough people that can vote for you, you don't get elected. So if you look at the history in the city of Washington, D.C., of how many Latinos, for example, got elected prior to the D.C. Latino caucus having that relationship, it wasn't many. It was actually very, very, very few. When I joined the Democratic State Committee some 15 years ago, I think we had only 2 of almost 100 members, an entire Democratic State Committee. And then when that relationship started between the Latino caucus and the Central Committee or the DC Democratic State Committee, we were able to see over the years an increase in voting member of Latino heritage into that Central Committee, to the point where by the time I left the party, we not only had over 14 members of Hispanic descent, but we had the National Committee woman, we had member of the executive body being Latinos. A big, big improvement over what we found prior to that relationship. So the political life started really when we empowered Latinos through the DC Latino caucus and got that relationship going. And then after that, of course, one of the things that we have at the Latino caucus is that we push for Latinos to run for public office, right? And naturally, it makes sense that if you have somebody at the top of the caucus, that he or she should try to also get elected. And that's exactly what I did in 2014 and became the U.S. Quote unquote shadow representative to Congress in 2014, a position that I ran for re-election 2 other times, and I'm currently serving my 3rd term. So that's how I started.
Wow, that is amazing. So literally you all were able to put on the map so many Latinos who were interested in serving their communities that would not necessarily have been able to do so. How does that make you feel?
Well, it's a very good feeling because not only personally, but I know what I'm doing for my community, right? I am empowering my community so that hopefully those people that we help to put in power will allow resources to be brought back to the community. Empowerment is all about resources, right? It's why I think it was such a great thing during this time of Black Lives Matter movement, during this entire Black Lives Matter movement, that Vice President Biden made a commitment not only to have a running mate be a female, but that he chose an African American female, because at the end of the day, if you want to impact a community, if you want to help a community, how you do it is you empower that community. And there's nothing greater than we're going to have Kamala Harris be only the 4th woman in history to be nominated for a major political party. That is huge. And the idea that she will end up being the vice president and could potentially be the first female of any race president is huge. That is how you help to empower a community. So the timing could not have been any better. And we need to ensure that all communities take advantage, particularly oppressed community and communities of color, and specifically the African American community. We need to ensure that we seize the moment. This is an incredible moment, and we need to ensure that we find the wherever there need to be adjustment, that we do it now. This is the time to do it. So this is why, what I fight for. So very, very happy that through the work and the advocacy I have done, I have been able to empower my community so that we have more leaders in power, and they in turn bring resources to our community. Thank you for that question.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, Kamala Harris being African American and Indian American is absolutely simply amazing. And you actually got to one of my questions earlier on Black Lives Matter, or mattering, Black Lives Mattering. How exactly, with this powerful statement, Black Lives Mattering, but actually doing the work, how important and how would you say we would end systemic racism?
Well, you have to look at every area, right? And I hope that people are doing that we go. So we talked about, or we have been talking about the situation directly with the police, right? Public safety, law enforcement. How do we deal with that? And so what we need to do is we need to look at each area that's affected. Wherever there is a need for improvement and correction, we need to look at it. For example, I think that law enforcement right here in the city, I've said this, I support our police force. But I think we have too many police officers. At over 4,000 police officers, we have a greater ratio of police officers to residents than anywhere else in the entire nation, including every major city. And that, and I understand that we are a special jurisdiction. I understand that. But we have over 20 plus law enforcement agency in the city. Crying out loud, the National Cathedral has its own law enforcement. And so, we need to think about this, right, if it isn't working. So I think that reimagining our police force, for example, needs to start with the hiring practices, right? We need to ensure that the police force reflects the community it serves, right? For example, more bilingual police officers are necessary, in my opinion. But that's true also of other ethnicities, right? And then we need to look at the internal processes of the force, right? I mean, this idea that you reward somebody for how many tickets they write versus how many community meetings they attend, or others, how many situations they de-escalated, is insane, right? And that's what it's been for a long time. And of course, at the end of the day, it's about accountability, right? The trust between the community and the police, it's critical, and we need to increase that. That's not that high right now. That trust between the community and policing, we need to ensure that goes up, and that is tied to accountability, right? The fact that we now put cameras on police officers, that is huge. That's a great plus, and you've seen the benefit of that, right? Now we can't be bogged down with this bureaucratic processes of how do we obtain the footage, right? We don't need that. That erodes that trust relationship that I'm talking about, right? And so that's what we need to do. We need to ensure that. But Black Lives Matter has not only brought about conversations in areas directly affecting police, right? It's taken us worldwide. We have the African diaspora really talking, engaging in conversations worldwide that we never imagined were taking place, right? And so it's important. And in every, we're not saying that nothing is working. We're not saying that our police chief, Chief Newsham, should be fired. I am not saying that. I know some people are, but for the most part, what we're saying is this is an opportunity to improve, to do better. Things aren't working for everybody. Why are we not going to take advantage of this incredible moment that we've got everybody's attention and try to improve? That's all we're saying. And that is true not only in police enforcement, it is true in education, it is true in job hiring practices, it is true across the spectrum. And I hope we can take advantage of that.
That's right. That's right. I love that. Yes, ending injustice everywhere is essential. Is essential to any type of growth in any community. Beautiful. So, of course, we're going to have a lot of students and educators who are looking at this video from District of Columbia Public Schools and possibly charter schools too, and independent and private schools. How important would you say our students are, our parents, our educators, including teachers and librarians and staff, support staff and office staff? How important are they in this most vulnerable educational time? How do we continue to support them and love on them?
Well, they're critical. They're the essence. They're the reason for the existence of the whole system, right? And so I've always said that in the case, for example, of the school system, I think that we can continue to improve it. I don't, my idea, I've been talking, I'm currently running for office for a seat on the DC Council. And so I am all over social media and, throughout all those different debates that have been broadcast, they can be seen over and over. And what I've said is that, and this is not an indictment, on Mayor Bowser, who I think for the most part is doing a good job. But I really think that we need to strengthen the school board. I think that, we have currently 9 elected individuals that serve. I think we need to ensure that they are adequately funded so that we can have a strong school board. And I think that we need to think about ensuring that our community schools are the first choice for every person, every child. I think I like the idea of having choices. If you have some schools that have special needs capability, right, at that school, I think that a parent should have the option to choose to put their kids at that school. But ultimately, every child in the nation's capital, the capital of the most powerful nation on earth, should find that their community school is the best school they can send their child to. They should find pride in wanting to put their kid in their community school. So whatever we need to do to ensure that that school has all the resources, that is a top-notch school, state-of-the-art, cutting-edge technology, whatever it needs, we need to make sure that takes place. If it means borrowing resources from a school that's performing way better to put it here, whatever we need to do, we need to ensure that all schools are performing in the District of Columbia. And for that, educators, students, parents are key. Your input it's without a doubt number one, because when you're catering to somebody, those people that are ultimately going to be the recipient need to be at the table, being considered to be the main people who are giving opinions and whose opinion it's being considered. So incredibly important that you all stay engaged, parents, teachers, educators, staff, students, everybody needs to come into the table to ensure that we have nothing but the best school system in the world, not in the nation, in the world. Why do I say that? Because this is the most powerful nation on earth. And our kids in the nation's capital should have nothing less than the best education in the world.
Yes, and oftentimes we do see a modern day busing system, unfortunately, when each community school does not have adequate resources. And we don't want that modern day busing system. We want every school, you're absolutely right, every school to be amazing. Library media specialists. Library media specialists are so instrumental in giving schools and communities, our students and educators, resources that they may not have ordinarily had. What would you say has been your experience with either library media specialists or books or libraries or bookstores? How important is that for our students to have library media specialists in the schools?
Incredibly critical. Let me tell you, I was one of those kids that wasn't very popular in school. And so my life outside of a classroom resided in a library. I loved having the ability, the opportunity to go to a library and have somebody help me find and in some ways nurture me really about all this knowledge that's out there. How do I get to it? So I was growing. Now, granted, these are different times, and you can acquire knowledge from so many different ways, so many different resources through the web now, right? So it's a little challenging to think of a physical place where you can really inject all this knowledge to you, when now you can take a little phone, right? A very tiny phone or a computer and get much of that knowledge. But I think that the experience is the same reason why we're asking when we're saying that sometimes we should consider, opening up places and perhaps, the school opening. I'm not sure what the outcome of it is going to be in terms of how, fast we open school. But the idea is that some of these places don't only provide the direct value of academics, right? There are other things that come with it, right? For me, being able to have that space, right, to go when even at lunchtime after I ate, and spend my time there, or whenever I had an opportunity, be it at the beginning of the school day or at the end, for me, that was a sacred space. It wasn't only about, picking up a book and reading, because I could have gone home and done that, but it wasn't about that. It's about the ambience, the surrounding, right? Where I knew I would be safe, where I knew I would be with other people that had like interests, right? And so it's a lot more than simply what the space provides to you, the book. It is all that comes with it, so incredibly important.
Yes, absolutely. I can't really say anything to that except for absolutely. Yes, library media specialists, libraries, books are, it's utopia. It's heaven, so to speak. So my last question for you, you are running for DC Council at large. And what exactly does that mean for you during this time in our world, in our city? Speak to a little bit briefly about your platform and how you plan to bring out some of the things in which we discussed. How do you plan to bring that to fruition as a possible new DC Council member?
Thank you for asking that. And in some ways, I think I've answered a little bit of it so you can kind of get an idea. We spoke about the education idea that I think that control of the school should really be given back to the school board. I spoke about a stronger school board. I talked about also law enforcement or public safety, how we have a three-channel approach where you talk about the hiring practices and the internal processes, and then ultimately accountability being important. And so I can talk a little bit about some of the other platform issues that I have. But first, let me say that so I am currently your United States representative in the United States of America, in the United States Congress. And one of the things that I do is I meet with other members of Congress, members of the House of Representatives, and I make my case that DC needs to become a state and that we need adequate representation in our national legislature, because it is an embarrassment that while we practice and we preach democracy throughout the world, right here in the crater of democracy, we lack it. It makes no sense at all. I've met with presidents of countries, I've met with diplomats, I've met with intellectuals, all kinds of people who could not, for the most part, they don't even know that such situation or arrangement exists in the United States. But they can't believe that it is true and that we have not corrected that, because it is just, we are the only country on earth that has a free democracy that does not allow the local citizens of its national capital to participate in its national legislature, called Congress in this country. That is an embarrassment. And so I advocate for the inclusion of our city as a state so that we can change that. One of the things that I'm also advocating for now is that our legislators at the local level should also have adequate representation of all the residents of the city. That's something that we have been missing for nearly 50 years since the existence of our city council. We haven't had adequate representation of all the residents of our city, and I am asking and I'm hoping that we can change that. And we have an opportunity to do that now. So that was one of my purpose for running. It was one of the something that made me run, that forced me to run. And I say forced because I sort of was like comfortable, being a member of the Democratic Party, being an elected official. So, but I heard from the community, and the community understood that I was in a good position in terms of my community outreach, my involvement in the city. People know me, not only the Latino community. I've done a lot of advocacy outside of the Latino/immigrant community. I've worked with Black Lives Matter. I've worked with the LGBT community. I've worked with women's group. I've advocated at the national level for more gun control. So I've done lots of advocacy at the local level, at the national level, and even at the international level, so people know my work. And so I am currently advocating for more equal representation at our local legislation. And I know that I am doing that, and that's a major theme in my campaign. But I am also advocating for all the things that every Washingtonian needs. I became a homeowner in the 90s, and because of the many programs that we had, the homestead program, tax abatement program, first-time buyers program, I was able to buy my first home, and subsequently later was able to buy a bunch of other properties and become a landlord because of programs like that. And so I want to ensure that more Washingtonians can benefit from programs like this and that we expand them. So I am all about affordable housing. And we need to ensure that people stay in their places. There are some people from Washington that left the city because they could no longer stay in Washington. We want to make sure, if we can, to get those people back in the city and really benefit from the growth that we've seen in the last decades of our city. Those people were here during more difficult and challenging times. I think that they should stay. Those that are having challenges, we should help them stay in our city. And those really that left, we should also have them come back if we can. So I'm all about affordability when it comes to housing and ensuring that people have homes in DC, whether you're a renter or you are a homeowner. We need to ensure that we have adequate programs to help you stay in place. I already talked about policing and what I feel about that, law enforcement, public safety, health. I think that health is important. You know, Washington is actually probably one of the places that ranks highest in terms of getting insurance to or coverage to its residents. We are, I think last time I checked, over 90% of the population in our city are covered. So that's good. And we want to make sure that that continues. One of the great things that we have in our city is that we have been designated as what they call a sanctuary city, which means that anybody that lives in the city is welcome here, and they're not, for the purpose of certain things or most things, they're not asked about their immigration status, including for the purpose of being covered under our health, public health system, which is good. And we want to make sure that we preserve and maintain that, right? And then we talk about education, and you know my position on education. And I don't want to extend it much longer because I know I've talked a lot about it. But if you go to franklinfordc.com, Franklin, FORDC.com, you can read and learn about all about me. You can read in more details my bio and all the different ideas that I have to ensure that we continue to, for example, provide the help that small businesses need. Right now, DC is known to be a great place for tourists to come in. We're not getting that many tourists right now, right? So we need to think about doing internal tourism, right? We have a region here, which is one of the most affluent in the entire nation. Let's go ahead and promote DC within, right? While some of these other folks from out of the region make it here due to this COVID-19 pandemic. So we need to ensure that we have people employed. So we are currently in phase 2. We've been in phase 2 since June 22nd, and Virginia has been, in fact, in June. They were already in June in phase 3. Maryland started a few weeks ago in phase 3. In some counties, I know that they haven't really implemented phase 3, but the state itself is. And so we need to start thinking about how do we safely, ultimately safety has to be in listening to science. How do we safely get the economy going? Because we need to ensure that people have jobs. When we talk about the affordability, housing affordability crisis that we have, a lot of it is tied to people being able to have jobs with living wage, people wages that are enough to pay for their rents, for their mortgages, and we need to have jobs for that. So we need to ensure that our economy continues and comes back vibrant and even stronger if we can, but we need to get started on that. So thank you so much for having me. I know I extended that response, but wanted to make sure that I throw in some critical information. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for allowing allowing this. And if you could actually give us your Twitter handle, where to follow you on social media. Also, I want you to leave us with a response in Spanish.
Absolutely. So again, I mentioned my website is franklinfordc.com. Franklin, FORDC.com. My Twitter handle is FGarciaDC. FGarciaDC. Bueno, muy contento de que puedan ver este mensaje. Felicidades en el mes de la herencia hispana que concluye el 15 de octubre. Espero que todos estén demostrándole a sus compañeros, especialmente los estudiantes, nuestra contribución como hispanos en esta ciudad, lo que nosotros aportamos, nuestra cultura, nuestra música, nuestra comida, y que nosotros podamos, a través de ese intercambio, demostrarle a las otras personas que nosotros tenemos mucho que aportar acá en esta ciudad. Así que muchas gracias por escucharme. Thank you so much for giving me this great opportunity to reach out to you all. I hope you stay safe above all. Make sure that you listen to science. That is key. I know there's a lot of conflicting information right now, but ultimately we need to listen to science. That is the bottom line. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello.